private water infrastructure companies in Australia and on the board of both the New South Wales and National Irrigators Councils. She has had first-hand lived experience of water policy development and implementation through the Water Act and Basin Plan years in Australia. It's my great pleasure to welcome Karen to the stage.
Trying some new technology. It's not paper. I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable about not having my paper, but we'll see how I go. Thank you for the introduction, MC. I thought it was important for you to understand that I have a bit of a baggage history, lots of things that I've brought to the table. A beautiful phrase that was shared with you from someone from the Peter Cullen Trust is this idea of cross-boundary leadership. And there are a room full of leaders here today. The idea that it's those people that can work across research, across industry, across communities, across government, that can actually see different perspectives. So I think it's helpful for you to know that I've come across these things in various parts of my life, and that's why I've ended up in the job that I'm in now, which I love. What I'm going to be speaking to you about today is about fairness, and about fairness is the basis of trust. I'm going to attempt to do my own slides. Let's see how we go. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Watertrust, who we are, why we exist, where we came from, so that we've all got that same common knowledge to start. I'm going to talk to you about what is fair and why it matters that we understand what fairness is. I'm talk to you about a little bit of work that we've been doing on creating some principles for policymakers, so translating fairness into policy and where that works. And then I'm just going to end with some lessons to go beyond water. Because you've heard this already today, at the end of the day, all of these things are about people and about people in process. The process on its own is not enough. I'm going to take you back to post-Basin Plan. It's probably about somewhere around 2012 now the Basin Plan's been struck. We've had the millennium drought. In some of our regions, we've also had the worst floods that we've ever had, more than 100-year floods. And by about 2016, we're back onto another series of droughts. And for some of those regions, these droughts are worse than the millennium drought. So we've gone past the book burning with the Basin Plan, but we're probably about the stage now when they were making effigies of ministers and sending them down the Murray River. So things are pretty hot still in the water reform space. We haven't quite recovered from what we did with the Basin Plan and how we might have got that wrong, which I know that you've been talking about over the last few days. Around that time, two major philanthropists, the Potter Foundation and the Maya Foundation, got their heads together and said, surely there's something we can do here for Australia. Surely there's a place for philanthropy. Things aren't going well. This is too important to get wrong. What's our place? They funded what they call the freshwater study. It's not just one little report, that's the summary picture up there. There's about 5 or 6 different components to that research. They went out, they funded Alluvium and Point Advisory to do some background research and figure out where philanthropy could make a difference to help move this forward, to help get the change that we all wanted. The research came back to them and said, well, it's not actually an easy fix. It's probably going to take at least 10 years and a bit more money than you were thinking of in the first place. We don't need another think tank. Actually, we've got knowledge. We've got lots of people that are invested in this problem, this issue. The problem is we're not bringing it all together. The problem is a policy problem. The real challenge is at the policy level. We don't need a think tank. We actually need an independent organisation. The gift of philanthropy was funding for 10 years to set up Watertrust. Watertrust is not a trust that holds water. It is also not a trust that has money that does all sorts of things. It is about putting trust back into water. They established Watertrust as an independent organisation to try and help do things differently in the water policy space. An honest broker, if you like. Somebody that wasn't funded by government, wasn't funded by industry, had the ability to pull people in and to work together to get better outcomes. They had the ability to fill gaps, they had the ability to convene forums, have the ability to perhaps go across some boundaries and look for different ways of doing things. It was described to me recently, we've been on a bit of a journey at Watertrust to describe what we are and how we do it. It's not really an advocacy organisation, but we can advocate. We're not really a policy organisation, but we can fund policy. We're not really research, but we can do research. And I had this lovely description the other day around this idea of a container for change. You think of Watertrust as a container for change. When you put in all the bits, you've got the ability to bring people, bring knowledge, bring gaps, and shepherd it through the process out the other side to get something better. I'm going to move my slides the same way I'm using here. So let me tell you a bit about what we do. I'm not expecting you to read that slide, and I'm very proud of that slide because we've spent a whole day and a half and a whole pile of people's time to build that time. It's our revised theory of change, and it's still in draft and it's still moving forward. I put it up there because, again, it just reinforces that challenge that we have in describing what Watertrust is and what we're trying to do. At the very ambitious end, of course, this is always about healthier catchments, healthier communities, and better ways of doing this, better process. It's about knowledge, it's about convening power, it's about deliberative processes. At the end of the day, what we want is those policy deadlocks to be broken. We want change, we want things to be able to move forward. We want decision-making systems that are inclusive, that are transparent, that have all the people involved and that are enduring. We want healthier waters. I'm going to test something with you. One of the things when we tried to explain what we do simply and more simple and more simple, at the end of the day, what we got down to is what Watertrust is about is actually helping Australians work together to achieve better and fairer water outcomes. And we do that through those sorts of mechanisms. And I know most of you will immediately say, what's better, what's fairer? Exactly. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Better as processes that are enduring, fairer as processes that people feel are fair, and what happens when people think they're fair. We're in year 4. The first 3 years of Watertrust's existence, we've been very much building our brand, stepping out quietly into authorising environments, building credibility, looking for opportunities to demonstrate different and better ways of doing things. We've done some interesting work in Adelaide, for integrated water management for Greater Adelaide. Interesting because it's involved 27 different agencies and over 150 stakeholders in about 2 years. And at the end of that work, what we've managed to do is get people to the table consistently and be able to provide opportunities for a way forward in terms of bringing integrated water management into Greater Adelaide at a time when Greater Adelaide is running out of water. We're also spending quite a bit of time at the moment in the Upper Murrumbidgee. The Upper Murrumbidgee feels like a very small little contained piece of the world, but it's connected to the Snowy Scheme, which means it's connected to national policy on energy as well as water. And the Snowy Scheme is connected to the basin through the Murrumbidgee and the Murray. So the work in the Upper Murrumbidgee is about bringing stakeholders to the table and demonstrating a structured decision-making process. In this state, stakeholders include 3 different arms in the Commonwealth Government, 2 different state governments, Snowy Hydro, First Nations people, people on the river, and as well as the environmental campaigners. So no mean feat. Having a great time there. What I wanted to talk to you today, though, was what's become really clear to us along the way is that fairness is the basis of trust. And in fact, fairness is at the core of what Watertrust does. Let's pause and start to consider what is fair. The Murray-Darling Basin Authority have an advisory committee on social, economic and environmental sciences. That committee, Axis, put a question to Watertrust through one of our expert advisory panel members. They asked us, what is fairness? Basin plan requires consideration of equity and of fairness as well as efficiency. But nobody seems to be able to tell us what that is or how we go about figuring out what we do with that. At Watertrust, we took that challenge and we started to build an evidence base. So we spent some time doing some research. What we've done is we've had a look at what others have said fairness is. So we've done a literature review. And the answer is it kind of depends. Fairness kind of depends. We've had a look at what the legal definition of fairness is. Fairness points to equity, equity points to justice, justice points to fairness, and they just point to each other. We had a look at what we thought stakeholders think. So we went through 10 years of submissions, over 1,800 submissions to various water inquiries to see how people frame fairness. Again, what we found was it was in pretty much all of those submissions, and that it was used differently. It was context dependent. What people thought was fair or unfair depends. We did a study where we sort of pushed people into giving us their views on what was fair in water. It's called a Q study. It's a small academic study with a very small sample. And what we found again was there are different views of fairness and what's fair in water, depending on your context, on your worldview. All of these base pieces of research for us have shown that fairness is actually something that's quite intrinsic. It's emotional. People know when something is not fair. It's quite a fast response. If something happens to you and it's not fair, you'll say it's not fair. You might not yet have figured out yet why it's not fair. What we've also learned from the research that we've done is that your view of what's fair or not fair can change. Once you get past an emotional response, if you're given time and opportunity to hear from different perspectives, the information that you need, you can shift. The emotion will go out of things and you can understand. And if you can understand, you can make a difference. For policymakers particularly, fairness matters a lot. This is an example from one of our pieces of research that shows where fairness or equity is mentioned in regulatory or statutory documents. So there is a requirement for policymakers across state and federal government, across different agencies, to consider fairness. Yet there is no description on how they need to do that. In fact, it all rolls up to discretion. It depends who's in charge, what kind of day they're having, what's happening in the media at the time, and whether or not they want to delegate that to someone more junior or more senior or into a different department. They need to consider it, but there's nothing that says what they need to do. The discretion is a bit of a double-edged sword for that reason. It provides a lot of power to our decision makers because they have the discretion, but it also provides a lot of opportunity for getting things wrong. The legal framework for discretion didn't have to be just the decision maker. And there've been some examples of court cases, one particular around the groundwater in the Murrumbidgee, and the court just put it back to the minister. The court refused to rule on what was fair and said that that was a matter of discretion, in which case it was a ministerial decision, in which case it went back. So it was a circular loop. So the people that are making decisions around what fair are doing so without any rules, without any guidelines, and with a full amount of discretion. In some recent work, we were testing the principles that we'll get to with some policymakers. One of the policymakers in the room was so excited that we were now talking about principles and potentially building a toolkit for policymakers on how they would manage fairness in building policy decisions for exactly that reason. In his view, this is something that everybody wants to do and nobody knows how to do, and the risk of getting it wrong is too great, and the ability for somebody to veto it when they don't agree is also too great. We've talked about this a little bit today. Miha had that interesting analogy earlier on of what it feels like when you're not involved in policy decisions. So the other reason why fairness really matters is it really matters on the ground. If people don't feel heard, if they're not part of a decision, if there's no time to build trust or build knowledge, it can be quite explosive. That's what we saw with the Basin Plan. There were actually two book-burning episodes. One was in Denny, one was in Griffith. I'm not sure which one that was. But again, it depends on your perspective whether that was catastrophic or whether that was actually galvanising. For the policymakers that were there at the guide to the Basin Plan launch when those things happened, they were devastated. They did not understand why people thought this was unfair or where they got it wrong or what was wrong, because they had the evidence base. It was a good scientific plan. It was a good plan that had the support it's drawing through. From a community perspective, this was huge. This was the first time in my life that I have seen an entire town shut down, schools close, buses come in from other regions, just to be there to say, we don't understand, this is not right, this is not fair. And this is the guide to the plan, it wasn't the Basin Plan that was made back. So what happens when communities feel something is unfair is they get a little bit upset. And they get a little bit upset, they get a little bit political. When things get a little bit political, all sorts of things stall. So what happens to even the best policy is it doesn't get implemented, or it doesn't get implemented well, or it doesn't get implemented in a timely fashion. So the other side is the other part to that slide is just demonstrating that. You can have a policy for buybacks that can be going really well, and then it can stop. You can have an opportunity for getting water back, it can go really well, and then it can just stop. Communities can refuse to take part. State governments can choose to play games of various sorts to stretch things out. We can wait for elections. We can do all sorts of stuff. Certainly what we're learning about fairness is that good policy is made better when people believe it's fair, even if they don't agree with the outcome. If they understand and they're part of the process, you can shift the dial. I'm going to talk a little bit now about fairness and it depends. So also a little bit from our research. MC Flame actually started out life as a psychologist. It's not the practicing kind, you don't need to lie on the couch. It's actually cognitive social psych, which is about processes that brain does to make sense of the world. So when I start looking at these things, I get really excited because this is the stuff that got me into this in the first place. This is when is a group a group? When is a collection of individuals? When does it have a norm or a culture or something that's more than any individual? And what we see in fairness, when we ask questions about water and policy and who should be doing what, is that there's some really big differences around what people as groups think is fair. And that depends on their social context. It depends on their culture. It depends on their lived experience. Two important points around this is they're not the same, they're all valid. They all need to be considered by policymakers. Because if you exclude one group's view of what's fair or unfair, again, you're going to go back to those policy deadlocks. You're going to create an opportunity for the political football to start all over again. The second important thing is probably that decision makers, policymakers, LLB public servants as well as government, guess what? They also have cognitive bias. They also have their own framing around what is fair, and hence why the poor staff of the Murray Darling Basin Authority, when they came to Griffith and saw the book burning, didn't understand. It wasn't even on their radar that what they were doing was going to be seen as unfair by others. That's a really important point in terms of where we go next. Because if we don't take account of all the different views of fairness, and if policymakers aren't even aware that they have their own view of fairness, and may or may not include others, we're almost shooting ourselves in the foot from the start. I'll go back to the point that I made earlier. People have a feeling of what's fair and what's not fair. It is a strong emotional feeling. It happens almost before you've understood the information. You get, this isn't right because, but it can change. And I guess that's where our work took us next. It can change in a number of ways. The work that we're doing now with Watertrust is actually about building those principles for change. The research that we've done has led us to this, and we'll go through this shortly. There's three big themes that come out as well as a small set of principles. We're now taking these principles down to that next level and working with the decision makers. Because it's the decision makers that, I know we talk about building trust, but if this works, these principles will enable our decision makers, our policy people, to earn trust as part of the process. The first of the themes is that fairness needs to come first. You need to actually understand that you can't go to step 2 without having understood that people need to understand what is fair and you need to understand the differences. It's often a prerogative to balance efficiency over fairness. We've got certain lead times, particularly as a government agency, to get things done. People want to see change and want to move forward. We've already got the answer, but slowing us down. Fairness needs to be balanced against efficiency. It's really easy in the absence of guidelines or tools for managing fairness or including fairness in your conversation to go straight to an efficiency agenda and just get it done and see what happens. You need to take the time to get it right. The next one's quite important. Again, it was one of the perfect lessons from the Basin Plan. You can have a technically brilliant optimal solution, but if it's not seen as legitimate, it's not seen as fair, it's not going to move the dial. Challenge for the policymakers is to get that difference between technical optimisation, what's right, what's the best possible thing we can do, and what's the thing that we can live with. What's going to make the change that's going to enable us to move forward. Even if it's not perfect, what's the right direction so that we can bring people with us and move forward and then move to the next thing. The next thing is about that, my favourite, that's that identity piece. Fairness needs to follow identity. We need to acknowledge right at the start the policy choices that we make are value-laden. A policy choice is made by a person for people. People are part of the policy process. People have values, they come with background, they come with culture, they come with what they already believe is a principle thing or not. These perspectives are all legitimate and they're all different. My perspective is legitimate from my point of view, yours is legitimate from your point of view. Until we've had the opportunity to have that conversation and understand, one, that they are different, and two, why they're different, and work through opportunities for change or getting to common ground, it's going to remain a deadlock for us. That means that you need to create space. Space needs time, and time needs, but you also need deliberation. Deliberative processes are at the heart of one of the things that Watertrust promote. It's not just sitting in a room and having a little chat and thinking about something or making sure people have got the right information. It's actually taking the time to work together to understand what the knowledge gaps are, what I think to be the truth, what you think to be the truth, where I might need more information or different information, and where you might have things that can fill the gap. It's moving forward together. It's a deliberative process, not a I'm telling you type process. Fairness will always be political. It's emotional. People feel things. They're afraid or excited or worried or they want something to change or they're not. It's always going to be political. The problem with a political process is it can focus on outcomes, not process. Where you've got a political improver that comes straight over the top of everything else and says, we're doing this, in the absence of a good process that enables people to be part of that process, it's going to struggle. Fairness needs to be at the start. The process requires early engagement. You can't come in at the end and go, well, we've done all the hard stuff, now we just need to bring you up to speed. People need to be part of the process from the beginning. There needs to be a clear decision point. You can't just keep going on. It's not just about the chat. You hear about this all the time about being over-consulted, or if all else fails, the government just moves on and we have another consultation process. So we have a beautiful 3-stage consultation process. Now coming back again to do another consultation and blah, 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 blah. There needs to be a clear decision and a defined endpoint. You need to know how we're getting there. Finally, there's an opportunity to use fairness and framings of fairness as part of the policy tools to move things forward. People need to understand in their own words, in their own world, in their own context, why you're doing things, what it means for them, and what the difference is going to be. At the end of the day, it's the people in the solution. You need to put people in the solutions. It's the people that matter here. MC was giving me a code which I think said, hurry up.
Exactly, yeah.
It was something about 15 minutes and 16. Excellent. She's giving me code with permission. Code. Final slide. Lessons beyond water. So again, like my little bio at the start, I started life in public health. I ended up in water by accident. One of the things that just blew me away as a young person working in public health was we were working on a new budget proposal to actually pay an incentive to general practitioners to prescribe according to their own guidelines. It's antibiotics. No brainer. They wouldn't have it. They would not be bribed. They would not be told by the Commonwealth Government what they would or wouldn't do. They knew their patient. They would do the best thing by their patient. The whole policy proposal went flat. It's one of those examples where the context might change. That's a public health context. That's no different to water. That's the Commonwealth telling GPs through their organisation what we're going to do to help them and help public health. That we challenge their integrity by doing that. We didn't get it right from the start. For me, the lessons beyond water is that going right back to fairness is universal. We all have it. It feels differently depending on our culture and other things, but it's innate and it's emotional. Fairness is the basis of trust. If you do something to me that's unfair, I'm not going to trust you. If we can work through our different perspectives on fairness, we're going to build and trust between us. Trust is the basis of good policy. And trust is why Watertrust was built, to try and bring trust back into water policy. If I trust the decision makers and others that I'm working with over the next 10 years in water, when they come up with their new idea, I'm less likely to actually pay 3 different consultants to fight them or start a political campaign against them. I'm actually probably going to trust them enough to at least have a conversation and be part of the solution. The final thing is that good policy needs to be fair enough. It needs to get to a point not where everybody is happy with everything, but where we've all agreed that we can move forward. To do that, people need to be heard. Processes need to be transparent. People not just need to be heard, they need to have felt heard. They need to know where what they've done has made a difference and be able to see that. You need to get everything askable. They need to know that they've been understood and heard, and the processes are transparent, and that they're open to something that I wrote down that was very clever that I can't even read anymore. Inclusive, transparent, and understood. I might leave it there and move to questions, given that my notes got rather scratchy at that point. Thank you, MC. How this is going to work is you're going to put your hand up and I'm going to point, and then you're going to run.
That's right. I'm the runner. I probably have a question too, but I'll save my question.
Would you like? First question over here. Thank you, Carolyn.
Coming for you, Carolyn. Oh, you're on
Thank you, Karen. I'm Carolyn Hall from Moy Institute. That's a remarkable presentation and has lots of sort of overlaps with the key success factors for collective impact as well. I'm just so interested in, given what you've found, how does that influence implementation or progress, for example, with, perhaps an Easter Basin plan or its water policy more broadly in Australia?
That's the classic so what question for anybody that missed it. You've done all this beautiful stuff. I'm sorry that Carlene's not here because Carlene is on our influence advisory panel, and Carlene and Lise Bully, who's also on our board, asked me exactly that question. Have you not read Community Voices, or what are you going to do to make this different? We're very, very aware that this can't just be some lovely research and a set of principles that won't work. The next stage of this process is actually working directly with government agencies and decision makers to help us build the tools that come out of this. This needs to be a toolkit. We also recognise that a toolkit is beautiful. It can be shiny and sit on your shelf, or you can use it. So we're actively using it straight away. One of the things that came out of both our engagement with the South Australian government officials and our work on greater water management in Greater Adelaide is an opportunity potentially around Mount Lofty to use the toolkits from Venus straight away with the government. So what we're looking to do is find opportunities like that build capacity capability and take very much an action research model where we're building as we go. We've got a fair idea of how that will translate. Similarly, in any of the projects that Watertrust takes on from here, we're going to be looking where fairness fits and putting that front and centre. And we have a very ambitious goal of trying to get our fairness toolkit into the state implementation plans for the National Water Agreement. I'll get in trouble for saying that out loud because Kane will have kittens, but that would be putting fairness right at the heart of national water policy in a way that the states need to consider it as they build their implementation plans moving forward. So long answer, short answer is we need to make it real straight away, and we have a plan for doing that both in our new work and in projects that we take on from here to demonstrate and build capability for those that will be using it going forward.
Yeah, I'll ask you something.
Thanks. Dean Taylor from Becca, Hunter H2O. How do you think the concept of fairness translates to different cultures? We do a lot of work in places like the Pacific and Papua New Guinea that might have different ideas about what's fair in their context.
Yeah. My understanding is it's fair, but it's different. So it would be no different to us talking about fairness across different groups in Australia. The idea that something is right or wrong, or feels good or doesn't feel good, or it almost links in with that respect as well. I'm not going to try and get academic on that one, but I have people I can put you in touch with that can give you the full background of why fairness goes across cultures, but it's different.
Thanks. Thanks very much for your presentation, Karen, and congratulations on that work. It's extraordinary. When I first entered the water sector in the late 90s, I was a late bloomer. I got involved in water participatory processes in water, and nod to Kayleen's work and others. I guess this builds on that, and I can congratulate you on that. But I wonder, how can we take all our learnings from our experiences of participatory processes and deliberative processes in water to this new work and focus on the outcome of fairness? Thanks.
the outcome of fairness being real change.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that if I've understood your question, which was there's a lot of work that's gone before that uses this. I think the real challenge is providing that toolkit for decision makers and enabling them through good governance and process to have to take this into account and be able to do that in a structured and consistent is probably the way that I put that way. It is no longer discretionary and entirely up to you how you do it. It's discretionary and there's a toolkit. The other part, and it kind of links in with Carolyn's question as well, is we're very aware that there's always, I think it's that top and bottom bridge that Hilton was talking about, or Carleen referred to from Hilton's work, Hilton's comment. It's this idea that we're also looking at the beginning of a new project that's actually about community. It's actually about how do you empower, and this comes to your point, people that will be doing this all the time, the knowledge keepers, the one that stay when the government officials go through their churn and changeover. Building the knowledge there about what good looks like, what they should expect and what they can expect. But doing that at the same time that you're providing that toolkit to people who are supposed to be using it.
Yes.
So from both ways,
Yes.
so that you can get that accountability. Accountability, that was the word I couldn't read on my slide, accountability.
Thank you for the presentation, Brian McIntosh from the International Water Centre, Lots of Syllables at Griffith University. I think there's two things I'm taking away. So I'll ask a question, but a quick kind of comment that I think do shift the dial a bit. You know, the idea of a toolkit. I haven't heard of anyone producing a fairness toolkit, some way of practically guiding a consideration of fairness into policy processes. And then that last little line on your last slide, policy is fair enough. That nails it. It doesn't need to be maximally fair for everyone. It kind of needs to be above some minimum. Satisficing is there's a word, a funny word, just above the minimum that's required across lots of stakeholders. But the question I wanted to ask was, back in the 2000s, Jeff Stein, he produced this great paper which characterised fairness, justice is fairness. Fairness is either distributive, procedural, or interpersonal. So people feel hard done by if they don't get the same size of the bit of cake as everyone else, but they're happy not getting the same size of cake as everyone else if the rules of the game are clear and they're happy with the rules of the game. And they're also happy and they don't feel unfair if they're treated well and with respect. That's the interpersonal dimension. So you've looked at all sorts of examples of where people have felt fairly treated and unfairly treated in it, without getting sort of too academic or research about it. Just a comment on how you saw fairness manifesting compared to that sort of three-way distinction that Jeff painted sort of 20 odd years ago.
So firstly, I'd just like to know that Jeff is one of our advisors on this project, and I'm very familiar with that piece of work. I'm not going to attempt to categorise each of those pieces of work, but I love the way that you described it for the room, and there's different ways that things can be fair, and the same piece of cake can be fair in one circumstance and not in others. The slide that I put up that had the bar graphs, and that was where we first started looking at people's perceptions of what's fair in the water space. And we asked some questions like, should government be more or less involved? Does the environment got enough water or not enough water? And various things like that. And what we started to see there was different things play out depending on experience, location, what group you might associate it with. I'm not sure that's quite getting to the heart of your question. But the three clusters, if you like, that we started to see through that research that we're testing through a much bigger representative study, which only ended last week, so I can't tell you what it says yet, was firstly those that live in the regions and are dependent on water communities had some very specific views. They felt that the basin plan was unfair, they'd done nothing to deserve this, they were good stewards of the land and water and blah, blah, blah. Those that were largely urban but very focused on the environment thought the whole thing was unfair, and we should be looking at environmental imperatives, the government should be taking a stronger lead in various other things. In the First Nations space, very much a focus on justice. How do we actually get back to righting the wrongs of the past in the first place before we even move forward? So different things around the same questions. I'm not sure that's your question, but I wouldn't mind just commenting also on the toolkit, because again, that has come from exactly a question like Carolyn's through our the value of Watertrust having advisory panels. So the influence advisory panel and the members of the board we had. Those questions came up very early. Surely this can't just be a piece of academic work that gives another set of principles to government. Go read the community voices, we've already done this. So the idea of making it something for them that is built into the governance structures and the communities are aware of as well feels like it's got the best opportunity for actually getting it used. If people are aware of this, they're using it. Yeah, and then here. Oh, sorry, 1, 2. Good.
Thank you so much. It was a great presentation. Just wondering, do the principles of diversity, equity and inclusion, or DEI, inform your work around fairness, and if so, how?
Good question, Becca. I guess the focus has been very much on water and water policy and the questions that have been asked in the known camps. I'd be interested in unpacking with you further where you thought that we might be able to take diversity, inclusion and equity in that space. It's been largely about the academic concept of what is fair and why. It's been very focused on what policymakers should be doing. It's been very driven around government structures and how you make change. So it hasn't gone down right to the level of who needs to be there and what's fair from all the different perspectives, which I think might be where you're coming from. But if there's an opportunity to add to that, then we can have a chat.
Thank you for your presentation. I think making policy is very complex, as you explained, so that's good learning for me. In terms of what I was thinking, if you could reflect on, for example, where Watertrust or yourself found the situation, how we make difference to policy.
I'm going to use our shining star example of the work that we're doing in the Upper Murrumbidgee for that one. So the Upper Murrumbidgee is the piece of land from Tantangara Dam before the Blaran Dam, people know the snowy ski, so above Canberra. In 2019, the Murrumbidgee River ran dry just out of Canberra. And there was a realisation that as part of developing the snowy stream, there was a deed how to manage the snowy and the other montane rivers by taking the water further downstream. That deed was put in place and didn't really consider things like the Upper Murrumbidgee, which has suddenly gone into state disrepair, to put it that way. That deed, that SWIWA deed, had no mechanism for review. Through a political process, part of the basin plan, that deed got opened up for review. The government had no idea how they were going to do this. We stepped in and said, we think we can give you a process. We've been working with some partners in Canada who had a very similar experience working with hydro and other competing interests through British Columbia example, using a structured decision-making process. So we stepped through, starting with the government and the officials saying, we think we've got a solution for you that's about process, not about the outcome. This is fraught, but there's a great opportunity because you're opening up this deed. It impacts the river health, it impacts upstream users, downstream users, the energy market, well, all other things. There's a process. Can we show you? They said, okay, who's paying? We said, you don't have to pay. We're the gift of philanthropy. We know this is a bit scary for governments. Let us run a forum. So we ran a forum, we brought in the overseas visitors and we demonstrated where this had worked overseas. That built enough interest for us to take it to the next stage. The next stage was a decision sketch workshop where we brought together a subset of the stakeholders that would be involved in the Upper Murrumbidgee, and we built a technical reference group and we did a back of the envelope of what it might look like for the Upper Murrumbidgee. And we got the stakeholders in the room, we got the Commonwealth Government to the party, we got the Energy Minister there, and we ran a workshop that demonstrated that proof of concept. Based on that, we then built that coalition of the stakeholders that were now quite motivated for change and could see a way forward, because it didn't come up with solutions, but people were in the same room as Snow Hydro for the first time ever. You had downstream water users, you had upstream water users, you had environmental water users, you had government agencies, all going, oh, I get it now. This is about us coming together and understanding what the trade-offs really are and how we might move that forward. As a result of that, we then worked with those stakeholders to inform both the current then and now current government, as well as the opposition, as well as key senators, about the process and the stages that we come to, and we lobbied them for them to give us terms of reference for the review that had the right timeframe, which they did, 18 months, and that included the deliberative process, which they did. So that was an example of taking government going, we don't know what we're going to do, we have to do something. It could very much have ended in a 3-stage consultation process and no change, to literally opening up the SWIA review to the Upper Murrumbidgee more broadly, and building a set of terms of reference that gave the right level of time and locked in a process that defies deliberation. So that's an example of really making a difference in terms of process. And those terms of reference were released before the election, which was the other thing that we asked them to do, get it out of the political space. You do not want this as a political football. You've got the stakeholders, you've got the momentum. We're not lobbying for an outcome, we're lobbying for a process. This is the right process. And they took that on board. Is that the last question? I've got one more right here from my engineer.
Oh, from your engineer. Well, okay.
Last one, engineer.
Well, it's totally fair now after hearing that the way you use the truth, so I accept it all.
Just like to say, my husband's a research engineer, my son is a 3/4 of an engineer. So I get you.
Thank you very, very much. In all the work that I've been involved with, this is the sort of the fundamentals of where we always have to start. My question, though, is your wording with the concept of process versus outcomes. And I understand why you're suggesting that we shouldn't come with a preconceived solution, but I think that's different to an outcome. And often, as we've just had an election, the government is charged with the responsibility of achieving a few outcomes. And so it's about how the fairness, I think, is that there is an outcome that's expected and there is a box around what's possible and what's not possible. And I wonder if that statement of yours in process versus outcomes actually would upset engineers or many of those sort of people who think that you're just having it totally open-ended, and I don't think that's what you're saying.
Correct. It's not what we're saying. There's probably two nuances around that. From a Watertrust perspective, the impartiality that we bring is we don't come prepared to support any particular outcome or goal or engineering or other solution. We would come to support a process that would enable people in the room to either agree that or find something better or different. I think you're right in terms of the government. The government should have really good goals and objectives of where they want to get to, but in terms of how they get there, that's perhaps where that nuance is. The best example of that I can give is my experience with the Water for Rivers process, which was buying back water for the Snowy scheme. The government made a very clear mandate they were buying back water from the Snowy scheme for the Snowy River. Then they set up an independent agency and said, got to get on with it the best way you can, and got out of the way. That didn't happen with the basin plan. So, yes, I agree. Thank you for the opportunity to make that clearer.
Well, I think in your statement, in your text, that you would potentially go to a policy notice with that statement.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I didn't get to ask my question. So Bag's sitting next to you at dinner.